1972, an eerie abomination made its first appearance on theater screens across America. It was the subject of a movie titled The Legend of Boggy Creek. The creature at the heart of this legend was dubbed the Boggy Creek Monster. While a nation came to meet this beast for the first time in the early 1970s, residents in the bottomlands of southern Arkansas barely batted an eye at its cinematic debut. They knew something the rest of the country was just beginning to grasp. See, the legend of Boggy Creek wasn't just a legend. For decades, reports of a huge, man-like, hair-covered beast who wandered the swamps and waterways had seeped into local folklore. While the excitement of the film appealed to the general public, those who had actually encountered the monster for themselves were haunted by its reality. The reality was a riddle. The reality was terrifying. This is Fouke, Arkansas. I didn't grow up here, but when I was just a boy, this place captured my imagination. I had only seen it on the theater screen, but I had often traveled to such small towns with my father as we camped and hunted throughout Texas and Arkansas. They were out-of-the-way places, quiet monuments of rural America tucked away from the hectic buzz of city life. A peaceful place to raise a family. And for a lot of people, that's all Fouke ever was. In the 70s, Fouke would gain notoriety, however, thanks to the release of The Legend of Boggy Creek. I saw the movie at the time with my family, and like a lot of kids fascinated by monsters, I was thrilled. The movie has since become something of a B-movie staple, but its magic and mystery has always remained with me. A mystery I wanted to help solve. I'm Lyle Blackburn. A few years ago, I wrote a book titled The Beast of Boggy Creek. The book takes an in-depth look at the mysteries surrounding the town of Fouke, and in particular, its most famous citizen, the Boggy Creek Monster. For people in southern Arkansas, the legend of Boggy Creek was more than just a movie. It was an introduction to their home, an area often overlooked by outsiders, a land teeming with wildlife, natural beauty, hidden mysteries, and countless legends. Fouke is a quiet little community tucked away in the corner of southwest Arkansas, just 20 miles from the city of Texarkana and 60 miles north of Shreveport, Louisiana. Despite its proximity to relatively large population centers, the remote wilderness that surrounds Fouke makes it feel like a world away.
Fouke, Arkansas is located in the southwest corner of the state of Arkansas in Miller County. Miller County is the only county in the state of Arkansas, or one of the two counties in the state of Arkansas, that is separated from the rest of the state by water. Red River carves it out away from the rest of the state.
This area is sometimes we look at as a lost county, the lost state of Arkansas.
It's a small country town, slow paced. The small town that we have here has got plentiful, a lot of wildlife around here. If you want to step out in the woods, you experience nature.
Fouke was founded in the late 1800s by a group of Seventh-day Adventists looking for religious sanctuary, a place where the devil and his minions could not reach them. The rugged lands of Miller County, which surrounded it, were often the backdrop for shadowy activities. Like so many areas of the Deep South, It was home to moonshiners, outlaws, and other unscrupulous individuals. Yet Fouke held its ground as a faith-based community where families could enjoy the benefits of small-town life.
It is a place in its history that was known for outlaws. And many of them would hang out in this area because they could access another state in less than 15 or 20 minutes.
And the town itself, Fouke used to be a big place. We had a train depot, we had a sawmill, and there was a lot more people down here then than there is now.
While Fouke has become known in modern times for its monster, the state of Arkansas has a long-running history with strange creature reports. While researching for my book, I came across numerous articles gleaned from newspaper archives that talk of terrifying encounters with man-like beings who lurk in the depths of the state's mountains, forests, and swamps. As far back as the 1800s, newspapers carried tales of these so-called wild men.
There are stories that come from the early 1900s. The Indians believed it's been here the whole time, and their ancestors lived with whatever this creature is. It's second nature to them.
The wild man descriptions are remarkably similar to Fouke's monster. While there aren't an abundance of historically documented sightings connected with Fouke, stories from the locals suggest this creature may have been sighted in the area as far back as the early 1900s.
100 years ago, there was something that happened down here. It happened to a girl. She was 8 years old, and she's been gone for about 14 years. She died at the age of 92, and she didn't tell anybody anything about this until she was on her deathbed. She had been fishing with her grandparents and her parents. They all fished right along the bayou right through here, and she had her little cane pole, what she called it. She went around a bush, and it was squatted down next to the water, and it was washing its feet off. And it stood up, and she stood face to face with it within 5 feet. She went back and got in the wagon. She never came back to this area.
Prior to me ever becoming a deputy sheriff, I was hunting one night. We used to fox hunt. I was hunting with my father-in-law, and he related a story to me that they were hunting, and all of a sudden the dogs shut down. The dogs quit barking. They came to them, who was in the draw between two ridges, and they couldn't understand what the problem might have been. But eventually there was a great big hairy-looking monster, as he referred to it, a man or whatever. They didn't give it a name because they didn't know what it was. Emerged out of the woods and stood there looking in their area, which they was at the bottom of the draw. And they had a small weapon with them. They fired it several times at the monster, but into the air, hoping to frighten it, but it didn't. It stood there, it walked, turned around, looked like it was looking down at them, and they did not want to leave their area and expose themselves going over the ridge. And so they stayed there for quite some time, and finally went home. And this was prior to me ever becoming a law enforcement officer. And the date and time that it happened, I don't know, but the story was told to me probably in about 1966, 67, that time period. So it already happened some period earlier.
I graduated in '64, so that's when our seniors had encountered some barefooted man on Boggy Creek. So they had 2 packs of coon dogs. They'd mixed packs. And on a given night, as they called, or we called, a barefooted man, because that was the tracks they found. He killed all the dogs, and they come to school the next day trying to get a vigilante thing going to go in there and hunt this man down on Boggy Creek. Some of the seniors went, a couple of us didn't get to go. We were tried, but our parents wouldn't let us. And they never came back with any proof as to who it was or what. That was our monster to us as we look back, hindsight.
On a warm May evening in 1971, the Boggy Creek Monster took its first steps into the public eye. Those sightings of the creature had been taking place years before the event that was about to transpire. This proved to be the tipping point. Just after sunset on Saturday, May 1st, at a small frame house off of Highway 71, the Ford and Turner families were just settling in for the night when they had an experience that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. Elizabeth Ford made the first contact when she was torn from her peaceful sleep by a massive, hairy hand reaching through a nearby window. Behind the hand, peering at her, were 2 red eyes that she said looked like coals of fire. The men of the house rushed outside to meet the thing head-on. Armed with a shotgun and a flashlight, they spotted the creature and started shooting. It fled into the nearby woods. The family quickly retreated into the house, where they called the local police, headed by Constable Ernest Walraven. Walraven and a young deputy named H.L. Phillips arrived at the Ford house and found the family shaken, but they found no creature on the property, so they took their leave.
I know that I arrived there and Red Walraven, who was a constable of Fouke at that time, we both arrived about the same time, and it was an uncontrollable type situation. There was total panic among the members, which was several people living there in the house at that time.
A short time later, the monster returned to the scene and was greeted yet again with gunfire from the terrified family. While no blood or other evidence could be found, the men were insistent they'd struck the creature and they had seen it fall. The incident proceeded to unfold with more sightings and a scene that proved terrifying for audiences when it appeared in the Legend of Boggy Creek a year later, wherein the creature attacked the youngest of the family, Bobby Ford. As in real life, the incident resulted in Ford being taken to a local hospital where he was treated for injuries and mild shock.
They said that Bobby Ford was definitely involved in something had actually happened to him. You know, he was had either wet his britches or something had happened there, you know, that caused this event to occur. But that he was in a state of you know, like shock.
The Ford incident was documented by the Texarkana Gazette in a series of articles that meticulously retold the encounter. Much to the Ford's chagrin, they became the subject of mockery and ridicule as the local monster story was shot down by skeptics. To make matters worse, monster hunters turned the Ford home into a tourist attraction as they searched the property for signs of the monster.
And we could look at the area and see that the area was disturbed, was tore up, and it was not something that was prefabricated because of the way the thing was disturbed. And actually, you know, dealing with a lot of people, I could tell that they themselves were not actors. This something had truly happened there. And this was the beginning of the so-called Fouke Monster in this area.
As for the Fords themselves, they quickly packed up their things and left Fouke, never to return. Fouke was abuzz with the latest news of the Boggy Creek Monster. Sightings ranged across Miller County, with a number of them occurring in locations such as Highway 71, the Sulphur River bottoms, the nearby community of Jonesville, and along Boggy Creek itself. Locals and out-of-towners alike formed posses to search for the creature, hoping to bring home the head of a monster to mount on their wall. As the scene in and around Miller County turned more chaotic with each passing day, media coverage of the Fouke Monster increased. Charles B. Pierce, an up-and-coming filmmaker with an eye out for a good story, decided the Boggy Creek Monster would be the perfect subject for his first feature film. After borrowing money from a local businessman, he gathered a small crew and headed to Fouke to make his movie. Though it was originally intended to be a documentary, the film turned out to be something audiences had never experienced before. Equal parts documentary, horror movie, and nature film, The Legend of Boggy Creek dramatized the story of the monster sightings. It featured non-actors, many of whom played themselves, reenacting their actual encounters with the beast. Locals, such as the Cerseis and the Crabtrees, shared screen time with the creature that had stalked their families just years and even months earlier.
Of course, I grew up with it before that. My family's Crabtrees, so you heard a lot of stories back long before the actual movie of Legend of Boggy Creek came out. So when my dad would take me to the woods and put me by a tree, you know, you prayed for daylight. You really did. It was quite startling to be out there by yourself during that time period.
Made on a shoestring budget and released entirely independent of major studio involvement, the movie was an instant success in the local region. Eventually, the film secured theatrical distribution and went on to play across the country. It enjoyed a particularly successful run at drive-ins, where it was often paired with other creature features, including those that focused on a burgeoning pop culture icon known as Bigfoot. By the end of the 1970s, the film had earned an estimated $25 million, an amazing feat for an independent production and a first-time director.
They were kind of excited. You know, it was something different. You know, the movie came out, we all loaded up in the back end of a 72 Vega, and we went and watched the movie. Back then there was a lot of excitement. You know, the movie had just come out, it was fresh in everybody's mind. There's sightings up and down 71 Highway between Texarkana and Shreveport. You know, just almost every day somebody saw something. And if they didn't see anything, I think they made it up.
I remember going to the movie myself, and the thing that impressed me was as I drove up to the movie theater, there was already a line of people strung all the way around the block. And I got there 40 minutes before it started.
Back in Fouke, however, the movie received a mixed reaction by the townsfolk. What was once a peaceful, out-of-the-way place was now the scene of a chaotic frenzy. The movie's success brought in waves of curiosity seekers and monster hunters who trampled the local countryside. While some locals benefited by the tourism, it was a headache to others. In one of the Legend of Boggy Creek's most iconic scenes, the Cerseis home is besieged by the Fouke Monster over the course of one evening. It's an incident I've been fascinated with since first viewing the film. But what became of the Cerseis? Like many of the witnesses featured in the Legend of Boggy Creek, the family was subject to ridicule, and for decades they were constantly questioned about their claims. Of the many witnesses I've spoken to, the majority are more than a little leery of speaking publicly about their experiences. Mary Beth Cerseis, the family's prime witness, was no different. As well, many of the actors featured in the film were local citizens who had not received a share of its bountiful box office. While the value of such notoriety was debatable, it was certain the tiny town would never be the same.
People came from all around. All armed guns, didn't matter. You go down the road, there's somebody standing on the road with a gun, wanting to kill the Fouke Monster. And we still continued to get these calls, these reports, but each time we did, it caused a lot of problems. The problem was with actually the citizens around Fouke. You know, they go out and look across their field, there's a bunch of people out with guns and stuff, and so we tried to keep it as quiet as possible after this event occurred.
When the movie came out, best way to put it is it revolutionized the culture of the city and the area.
When they made the movie, half the people shunned it and half the people embraced it. So you had a split reaction on what was actually going to transpire while they were making it. So you had a line of people ready to be on it, you had another line of people ready to walk out the door. The ones that they did interview that I saw on the movie, I know in person, they're credible. They don't just make stuff up to be making stuff up. And if they told you a story, it's what it was. You know, they just weren't out there to try to make a buck off a movie.
The movie, we got a response from all over the U.S., And, you know, and a lot of people after seeing the movie wanted answers because they themselves had experienced something like that, you know, somewhere. But it was a wide, you know, it came from all over the states.
The Boggy Creek Monster seems to be a phantom, rarely leaving behind any physical evidence. But on June 13th, 1971, that would change. Tracks were found in a local bean field owned by Willie Smith. They were unlike any the town folk had ever seen before or since. Possessing what appeared to be just 3 toes, the tracks followed a path out of the bordering forest, across the field, and then back into the woodline. I noted the proximity of the field to the famed Boggy Creek itself when I visited the location during one of my research trips. While the strange tracks do raise a number of questions, they were discovered at just the right time, allowing them to become a feature of Pierce's movie. But what kind of huge bipedal creature can carry itself on such a narrow 3-toed foot?
Actually, my uncle's field was down where the first tracks were found that kind of stirred all this up. That Willie Smith's farm down there, he was my great uncle. And I used to pick cotton on that same soybean field.
I lifted several tracks out of the bean field. I recall seems to me like probably about 13 inches 3-toed. but I lifted a lot of plaster cast out of that field.
Like my uncle lived down here. He called my mother, so they got her to bring a bag of her plaster Paris down to Willie Smith's farm and mold 3 of the tracks.
And what made that incident different from a normal thing is the strides were so far apart.
And to our knowledge, it's only existing print, only existing cast of that year and time. It'll measure roughly 14 inches, but the foot does a concave thing in the dirt and the sand. You can see the claws, his toenails in the area on it. It still has particles from that time caught up in the plaster.
The tracks went from the road to the other side of the road. I recall there's so much debris and everything, but this was a plowed field. And went for a short distance until it went back into another brushy area. But from that period over, there were several tracks embedded.
But, you know, you can't, part of the evidence you can't overlook is people seeing things, even where they got physical evidence to show or not. And it convinced me that, you know, there's more to it than just, you know, just talk. You know, the legend is more than just a legend.
The footprints offered a compelling bit of evidence for the Boggy Creek Monster, but not proof. Skeptics were quick to point out the implausibility of the bizarre tracks. Still, sightings of the creature persisted well beyond the movie.
Scene 1B, shot 1, take 3.
Hold on, sorry. Ready?
Okay, we're good.
All right, action.
It was the history of the movie and the search for the truth that first brought me to Fouke. It was a place that had such a huge inspiration on my life. But what I found was that the sightings of the creature had not stopped in the early 1970s, as many came to believe. People did, in fact, continue to see the alleged creature. One of those people is Will Lunsford, a boy who had encountered the beast in the late 1970s and whose life has been immeasurably changed by it.
What year was that? What was the
This was 1977, and I was a senior in high school. And as I said, I didn't expect this day to be any different than any other day I'd ever spent down here in my life, you know.
Speaking with people like Will is a constant reminder of just how much the creature can impact the life of a witness. For some, the encounter becomes a force that haunts them their whole life. For Will, it's the driving force that compels him to search for the creature long after he first saw it.
And the Fouke Monster here, and I was not a believer in the creature. And so, like I said, I didn't expect anything to happen. And
had you seen the movie prior to this?
I had seen the movie back in probably 72 or 73 when it came out.
So that day when you had the encounter, what were you doing? Walk me through that.
Okay, I was down there fishing, and about the same time it is right here today, right now. And the sun was starting to set a little bit. I had a few more pits that I was wanting to fish and get to. So as we did that right there, I kind of stepped up a little bit, and I came to a crossing of this gas line. And as I went to cross, I'd been smelling this nasty smell. And I thought, well, that's roadkill, because there's always fish, there's things that have been coming out of the gravel pits, animals that have been eaten, so it didn't, you know, I didn't think anything about it. So as I went to cross the gas line up there, there was something that just didn't look right. And I'd walked this place thousands of times before. And so I kept looking, I'm like, something is not right. Something is not right. Well, finally, I guess I had sit there and stared at this thing long enough. He was stepped off the road into a shadow, so to speak, right there behind a tree. And all of a sudden he's down, and then all of a sudden he lifts this bush above his head, and he starts standing up. And he keeps standing up, and he keeps standing up, and I thought, bear. You know, first thing I thought, you know. and which would have been frightening enough in itself. But then whenever he sit there and I got a good look at the face, I realized that's not a bear. And he sit there and looked at me, and I couldn't move. I wanted to run. I just couldn't run. And so I sit there, and he walks out in the middle of the trail, right here where I'm fishing, and he just sit there, and he just stares at me, and he kind of teeters like this right here. And man, I'm just I can already feel tears coming down my face. And so as he stands there maybe 30 to 40 seconds, he walks back to the tree. He pulls the same limb down. He does what I call skin the cat, puts it in his lips, does that, and he walks back out in front of the trail again there in front of me, and he stands there and teeters like, don't come down here. This is still my territory. Right. He sits there maybe another 20 to 30 seconds, and man, he just wheels and goes into the woods. And in 2 steps, you don't see him, and in 3 steps, he's gone, man.
Will Lunsford's sighting location is in the heart of what seems to be the creature's domain. While there are sightings along Boggy Creek closer to downtown Fouke, the bulk of them take place further from civilization. As development continues to overtake the land, it's easy to theorize that perhaps the creature is retreating into the uninhabitable areas outside of town. Just a few miles west of Fouke lies the Sulphur River bottoms, a vast floodplain that derives its name from the Sulphur River. Encounters there have a long, lingering history that seems to have been dredged up from the swamps themselves. For nearly 2 centuries, stories have been coming out of places like Mercer Bayou, Carter Lake, and Gifford Hills. Over the years, as my research into the Boggy Creek case continued, I found myself constantly pulled back to these locations. These are the wild places of southern Arkansas, acres and acres of untamed, overgrown lands flooded by the black, murky waters of the bayous.
Of course, now the bottoms here around the Mercer Bayou and Sulphur River bottoms, that remains pretty much the same as it's always been, because it's so uninhabitable. There's a lot of land no one's ever set foot on, I'm sure, back in there.
This area around here in Fouke, the abundance of animals. Any big predator would just have a field day here. I mean, hogs are easy. They're there for the taking, I think. And you're seeing more and more signs of dead animals in the woods, bones. You know that it takes a large predator to take down such the size of an animal.
The bottomlands are fed by numerous waterways, and of these, none is more infamous than Boggy Creek itself. But for all its notoriety, Boggy Creek is little more than a small tributary that snakes through Miller County. This may seem underwhelming given its historic prominence in a famous film. However, tracking the sheer number of sightings that take place along the waterway makes it significant. The creek meanders west of Fouke, under major roadways, through farms, fields, and dense forests, and eventually spills into Days Creek. So did the film make Boggy Creek part of the legend, or did its legendary status date back even further? I came to find out that Willie Smith, the same Willie Smith who owned the bean field where the tracks were found, told a reporter for the Victoria Advocate newspaper that his sister had encountered the creature near Boggy Creek as far back as 1908. In 1955, Smith claimed that he himself had been haunted by the creature near his house, which, not surprisingly, was situated along Boggy Creek.
Days Creek and Boggy Creek have remained pretty well the same. And it is a creek where there are a lot of snakes, turtles, beaver, fish, gar, all kinds of wildlife of that nature.
That the stories coming out of Mercer Bayou and along Boggy Creek are a lot more believable when you sit and listen to them.
Most of it was in the Boggy Creek area, was in a secluded part of Miller County. We had one couple that was fishing on Sulphur River and heard something coming through the woods and saw it go down into like the briars and debris and stuff that had came up on the bank, and saw it go down in there and come out and just actually disappeared. They said when they saw it, they immediately turned and started going back up. But they described it as a great big, monster, as they put it, just unidentifiable. Now these are, just 2 people fishing.
It was November the 2nd, 2011, and I was down here at Thornton Wells, and I forgot my game camera down in the bow. We had a big storm that night, so my wife calls me and says, you need to go get your camera out of the bow. So I come down the bow, get my camera. I was on my way to military duty, so I was still in my, my ACUs, my Army stuff. I come down here, get out of the truck, walked about 60 yards, and something had gotten between, or was already here, between me and my truck, and I got a knock. It knocked 3 times. It was in sequence, nothing sporadic. It's kind of freaky.
The legend of Boggy Creek may not have passed into legend at all, if not for the Crabtrees. As a kid, I was well aware of the name thanks to the movie and its musical interlude, which sings, "Hey, Travis Crabtree." The Crabtree family have been local to Fouke for over a century now. They lived and worked in the same wild lands that some speculate the Boggy Creek Monster calls home. As far back as the mid-1950s, members of the family claimed to have had sightings of the beast. None of the Crabtrees were more tied to the Fouke Monster than Smokey Crabtree.
I was born on the banks of Sulphur River, 7 miles from a little town called Fouke. There was 7 children in the family. My dad died when I was 5 years old. Left mother with 7 children to raise there on the bank of the river in the woods, 7 miles from the closest grocery store. But we growed up in the woods with the animals. Now the creature that we've all been after for 30 or 40 years, some people call it the Bigfoot. Some of them calls it the Fouke Monster. Some of them calls it the creature. But it'll take a long time for them to ever outdo that animal.
I grew up with the Crabtree boys. Some of them, one of my best friends was one of the Crabtree boys, and his brother was supposed to be one of them that had seen it, Lynn. And I take very much stock in what they would say, as being the truth, as they see it.
Smokey's son, Lynn, had one of the most legendary sightings. In 1965, when Lynn was just 14 years old, he encountered the creature on the backside of their property while hunting squirrel in the woods that bordered Crabtree Lake. It was early evening when Lynn heard what he thought sounded like the family dog caught up in a barbed wire fence.
All at once, his dog got hung up in a fence. But the dog sounded like he was killing himself, so he figured, well, I better get out and try to get the damn heated owl there. So he jumped up and started running out there, and when he got to where he could see, it was that damn creature making that racket like a dog hung up in the fence. And he was standing at the water's edge. His full back wasn't to the boy, and the boy was now about 60 steps away from him, and nothing between him and that critter. He could see the side of his head and part of his back and all down one side. And he said that thing was letting off body language that told him that he is highly pissed off. And his arms hanging down, his arms was longer than his legs, the way he was crouched. And he said it looked somewhere between an animal and a man. And he said, sure enough, the thing did give up. And if he'd walked back up that old road, the way he come down, he might not ever seen the boy standing out there. Walked right toward that boy, looking down. And he smelt the boy before he seen him. And he stopped real short. And he went to breathing all in the air. And directly that joker spotted him. And he didn't take his eyes off of him again after that. He kept smelling the air, and he kept bending over farther and farther. He wanted to know what that kid was, but he didn't want to get any closer. He said the thing looked enough like an animal he wasn't fixing to talk to it, but it looked enough like a man that he was scared to shoot it. So he stood up and got to shuffling, and said then the thing just started slowly easing on out toward him. Had hair all over its body. He said he knew he couldn't hurt it with his shotgun, squirrel shot. So he shot for its eyes, hoping to make it leave him alone or damage its eyesight. Act like it never even heard the shot. He emptied his gun, shot him the third time. Then he turned around and started walking, looking back and loading his gun. And then the thing wasn't chasing him, but it was moving faster, kind of keeping the same distance. He said the first thing you know, he was loading his gun while he was trotting. And he said when he got his gun loaded, fear had overtook him. And he never did stop and make a stand anymore. He headed for home, and when he got home, he was completely panicked.
On the Crabtree side, them boys lived in the woods. That's where all their food came from. And most of the time, if they saw something, they're not going to tell anybody outside of the family. So if you're getting a story from them, it's because they didn't understand what they saw. If they understood it, a lot of times you wouldn't hear about it.
I had to tell you, my great-grandmother told me about this long before that movie came out. She would tell us she was a Crabtree. She was married to a Jones, and several of the characters that were in that movie were related to her, you know, and to my mother. And they were tight-lipped. If you ever met the Crabtrees or any of the Joneses, they are tight-lipped people. They keep a lot of stuff to themselves. They don't tell a lot of things. So if you wasn't hearing it from them, most of the stuff, you couldn't believe it.
While Lynn had the actual encounter with the creature and Travis went on to enjoy notoriety as the star of a feature film, their father, Smokey, was the one who kept the legend alive. Despite a dramatic disagreement with Charles Pierce over the compensation for the movie, Smokey never could outrun the specter of the monster. He penned 3 books on the subject, appeared in documentaries and television news segments discussing it, and was generally acknowledged to be the authority on the Fouke creature. Ironically, despite his significant association with the monster, Smokey never had a sighting for himself. In 2016, Smokey Crabtree passed away. Right up until his death, he was still searching for the beast that had haunted him for much of his life. Among those who have crossed paths with the Boggy Creek Monster, I've found few more credible than Terry Sutton. He came to me with a story unlike any I'd heard. Not simply because he had seen the creature lurking in the woods behind his home, but because the lasting effects were apparent. Add to this that Terry had never spoken publicly about his sighting prior to my interview, and you have a unique story that stands apart from many of the Fouke encounters.
It was in February in 1982.
Right, and I think that was definitely one of the significant things when I talked to you about the date of your experience, because that was sort of showed that the thing continued. You know, when the media frenzy had stopped and all that moved on, yet sightings still occurred. So it was a significant point, and one of the first in the 80s, you know, because the 70s are what a lot of people's impression were, that, you know, how that was a movie and a bunch of people had sightings then and it all just went away. Well, maybe the media and the press and the movie went away, but for somebody who lived here, it continued.
You know, when you look back on your life, it kind of runs and fast forward, and there's a lot of fuzzy areas. You know, the majority of your life is kind of fuzzy, but there's certain events that are very vivid, and that day is still kind of replays like a movie in my head. It's very vivid. So I came down here. The boat was parked on the end where it always was. Got in the boat, went around, and then fished up in the neck. At the end of the day, I was coming back out, and right about this corner here, when I came around the bend, is when I noticed that the creature was walking down toward the levee and then down toward the creek. I stopped, obviously, and watched him walk on to the levee, and then didn't move until I saw him disappear over the hill. It was probably about, it was roughly 7 feet tall. He was thin, had black hair, had a noticeably poor posture, walked slumped over, shoulders forward, and a very long stride.
You had seen it, it walked out of sight, and it was gone, and, you know.
Interesting enough, when I saw it, it was not as, I wasn't as scared as I thought I might have been. When I really became frightened is when I heard it run. Sure. And not knowing which direction, that's when I became really frightened.
Right.
and started running myself.
Terry's father, Lloyd, knows as much about Fouke and its history as anyone. An amateur photographer, Lloyd raised Terry to be a man who could handle things for himself, and neither of them are given to tall tales or hysteria. Lloyd played a key role in establishing the validity of Terry's story. While he himself has never seen the creature, his memories of the night Terry did are as vivid as if he had encountered it for himself.
And Terry had just got to the house when I drove up, and he came out on the patio there, and he had his hands over his face. I said, "Terry, what's the matter?" He said, "Daddy, I just saw the monster down at the pond." I already believed it before he saw it. I'd talked to a lot of people that have seen it before, and he made a believer out of a lot of people because he's so reliable. They know that he would not make something like that up.
Obviously, for someone who talks to people like this frequently, you know, it's not isolated to any one person. This is something everybody has to face and come out. And of course, I appreciate you taking me through this, because I know it's a personal event and something that can have lasting effects over the years.
In reflection, it's just a fact of something that happened, and you taking all the emotion out of it. It's just a fact of something that happened in your life. It's an event in your life, and whether people believe it or not is their own choice. But you can't deny the fact of what I saw.
The Suttons live in the small community of Jonesville, where, in the 1960s, a number of sightings of what was then dubbed the Jonesville Monster occurred. It's perhaps no coincidence that so many of these early occurrences took place from the relative safety of a car. Typically, the driver sees little more than a large, black shape crossing the road as it darts into the woods at high speed. It makes sense that so many sightings occur on roads. Any animal traversing the dense forests and endless swamps that cover southern Arkansas must eventually make their way across the blacktop, gravel, or dirt pathways that crisscross the state. As far back as 1955, two Jonesville residents recounted seeing a creature that, as they put it, walked like a man but was too hairy to be a man, cross the road as they were driving one night. In 1965, a young Fouke boy claimed to see a large, hairy beast while walking on a dirt road. The boy went on to say that the being had attempted to chase him before disappearing into the woods. 1 year later, a school bus driver saw the same creature in the early morning hours. During 1971, several sightings of a monkey or gorilla-like creature came in. One of the most memorable occurred just weeks after the infamous Ford incident. In this case, 3 people saw the alleged creature cross the road very near Boggy Creek. It seems that simply driving from one destination to another in Miller County can lead to an encounter with the legend itself.
One report was from actually a deputy sheriff and his family. They, down near Boggy Creek, they was traveling north on 71, and one of the family members noticed something standing on the west side of the road and alerted the driver, and he started slowing down because it was unusual to see it. All of a sudden it got up and ran across in a matter of a few yards in front of him, and said it was a large, big, gorilla-looking like thing, like, you know, and said he went across and bounded over a fence and just kept going.
And a year and a half ago, somebody told me, "You need to talk to somebody." And I said, "Well, this guy, he's like one of my best friends who lives in South Texas now." And I called him and said, "You need to tell me a story." He said, you know Gifford Hills, that place we parked at all the time on South State Line?" I said, "Oh yeah, I know it well." He said, "I started walking down that road one morning, and I got about 50 yards down that road, and I look up, and there's something standing in the middle of that road. And I stopped. And I said, you know me, I got guns, I got pistols, I got my shotgun, I'm ready to go. I'm talking to it. I said, who are you?" He didn't answer. He said, "Hey man, I got a gun." He said, "I'll kill you." And that's exactly how he talked. He said all of a sudden, it wasn't one thing, there was 2 things standing there. And it just slightly just strolled across the road.
It was September the 25th, 2011. I had went over to a friend of mine's house to do some schoolwork. It was probably getting close around midnight. I got ready, packed my books up, packed my laptop up, and went outside to put it all in my car. I noticed whenever I went outside that it was just kind of strangely just quiet. No crickets, nothing. I get down her driveway and I turned on to 206 and then took a right and turned on to 40, headed towards 10, which is towards my house. And as I came around the curve and came up the hill, there was a pasture over here and they had been rolling some hay up to get ready to be moved. Well, there was a couple of rolls out in the field. I don't know if it like turned around or was squatted and came up, but something caught my eye over in this field, and as my light shined on it, I could see like the greenish color, like a deer would whenever you see a deer. And I noticed it. The roll of hay was about 5 foot. Whenever I noticed it, where it was at, the roll of hay was right here on it. As I seen it, it's just like it happened in an instant, so fast and so gracefully almost. It runs across the field and darts off in front of my car. I slam on my brakes, literally from here to here. I could see the monster plain as day. It was like in a running man position. I could see its feet, its hair. It was more like a coarse looking dark brown. It had leaves all over the back of it. I could see the muscle movement of like the legs, the muscle structure of the legs and the arms and around the back and stuff. It was pretty massive. And it just crosses the road into like a brush and barbed wire fence. Frightened me, yeah. Excitement, just kind of a little bit of excitement, a little bit of frightened, because I mean, you don't know whether it could be mad or what.
My encounter with this thing occurred on a day I had been trying to get close to an alligator. I love to take photos of animals. Love to take alligators is my passion. I've walked up within 15 feet of a 500-pound black bear. I've walked up on a cow, elk, snakes. I do wildlife rehab, so I handle baby animals on a frequent basis. And had gone to was on my way to a different location that my cousin had told me about, that, hey, you can see alligators down here. Was driving down this dirt road and going real slow, and probably 50 yards, 75 yards in front of me, I catch a glimpse of something coming out of the woods. It was on 2 legs, running straight up, 7 or 8 foot tall, and it makes 3 strides, and it's across the road and into the woods. The encounter itself, split seconds. I mean, you know, and it was just, you kind of sit there dazed, because nothing in any kind of wildlife book or any kind of thing you've ever seen can describe what I've just seen, you know, and you know, what was that? And within 15-20 seconds I hear something holler, and I pulled a 3-point turn in the dirt road and take off.
Doyle Holmes lives near the river bottoms, a good distance from downtown Fouke. A family man with a love for hunting and fishing, Doyle knows these woods better than almost anyone. Doyle claims a couple of encounters with a creature in what happens to be the same area as one of the Legend of Boggy Creek's most notable characters resided. In the film, young Travis Crabtree drops by to visit an old hermit named Herb Jones, who lives deep within the bottoms. The scene was based in reality, as some of the locals did visit Herb Jones whenever possible. Despite living in prime Boggy Creek Monster habitat, Herb claimed to have never seen the creature. Before we write off the creature's existence based on the testimony of one person, however, keep in mind that much like the creature, Herb shunned civilization and wouldn't have wanted hordes of people disturbing his peace and quiet as they searched for the monster in his own backyard. Few people I've encountered have run across the Boggy Creek Monster on more than one occasion. Even fewer are the times I find it believable. After all, we've been searching for the creature for decades, maybe even centuries, with no luck. What are the odds that one man would run across it more than once in his lifetime? However, given Doyle's proximity to an isolated, underpopulated stretch of woods and a murky lake that sees few human intruders, it is possible.
So, take me through the incident where you saw the creature in the cypress canopy. How did you get in that position and what did you see?
Okay, back in 2004, I decided to get up early and go fishing one morning. Unloaded the canoe and put it in right before sun come up in the morning. I want to be out before daylight, so I have my lines in the water.
Right.
And about 30 minutes later, as the sun started to come up, I could hear a splash in the distance. So I kind of wanted to get a little closer to see what it was, so I easily paddled over through the mist of the early morning. And as the sun started to get just a little bit high in the trees and shine through the mist, I could see a two-legged figure off in the distance under the cypress. And the water was up over the land, and he was kicking around in the water, making loud splashes like he was looking for something. And at that point, I kind of paddled, see if I could get any closer without him seeing me. Mm-hmm. And there was a point where I could feel that he knew I was there. What I was looking at was very large legs, hairy legs, and you can tell what it was a very powerful bipedal animal.
What would you estimate the height to be if you could take it?
At that point, by his legs, I would have to say that it was at least 7 feet. Looked like an animal weighing at least 500 pounds.
Despite occurring in the early 2000s, Doyle's description is much the same as Terry Sutton's, whose sighting happened in 1982, or Will Lunsford's, who saw it as a boy in the late 1970s. As a matter of fact, their descriptions sound nearly identical to what people were seeing prior to the Legend of Boggy Creek and on back into the 1950s. And what about those reports of hairy wild men from the 1800s? While descriptions from the 1800s are wrapped in terminology we don't use today, at their most basic, what people were describing was an upright, hair-covered, man-like being who shunned mankind and kept to itself. The Boggy Creek Monster didn't just appear in 1971 when it made headlines. It's been here all along.
There were rumors years ago of a circus train. We got 2 railroad tracks just over here, probably not even a mile, of a circus train wrecking, and something could have got off that circus train. So I went to the world books, I looked through all the animals. It was not a sloth. It was not any kind of bear. It wasn't anything. The closest it resembled, like I said, it resembles an ape, like a gorilla, except an 8-foot tall gorilla that weighs about 800 pounds.
I talked to so many people that live in this area that has actually seen something in their yard. They claimed it to be a gorilla, a monkey type animal, and some even believed it was a large bear until it ran off. And then the story changes. I've talked to hunters that's been ran out of the woods, unexplained noises. I got friends that claim that people have turned apes loose in this area.
It's not a panther. No way. It's not an animal. An animal, panther don't go in and beat on the window try to get into a house, and a panther don't do all the different things that people say. It definitely was not. This is something that was knowledgeable, something that knew how to enter a house by knocking out a window and knocking out of a door, things such as that. So this is not an animal.
Whenever it ran from the hay bale to in front of my car, it was just like I have this image, just like picture image in front of my head. I could see the muscle movement of like the legs, the muscle structure of the legs and the arms and around the back and stuff. Its hands and feet were actually darker than the hair color, kind of like a monkey or an ape would be.
As for evidence of the monster, I keep going back to the 3-toed track. Why 3 toes? If it's not a hoax or a misidentified natural animal, then what kind of bipedal 7-foot-tall creature can carry itself on a foot with only 3 digits? A few years ago, while hog hunting in the same area where his encounters occurred, Doyle and his son found a line of tracks not unlike those found in Willie Smith's bean field, only this time with 5 toes. As with so many of the mysteries connected to the Boggy Creek Monster, this seems to raise even more questions.
You know, a lot of people say that the Fouke Monster has 3 toes, and I mean, this goes back to what the movie portrayed, and it has become something associated with the Fouke Monster. But this is a 5-toed print,
Yes.
Which is closer to what we see as Noah's Bigfoot tracks. In your opinion, does it seem more natural that it has 5 toes?
Yeah, I've personally never seen any 3-toed tracks that didn't turn out to be a crane. All the tracks we've seen since, and we've seen quite a few in the berry patches through the years, and they all had 5 toes.
Few elements of the legend of Boggy Creek are as memorable as the creature's famous scream. But was the scream based in reality? It seems that way. In 1916, a family traveling near Fouke encountered a hairy figure that let out a bone-chilling shriek. And there have been other reports of bizarre sounds emanating from the woods of the area. Smokey Crabtree himself reported hearing a strange scream near his home on more than one occasion. And in my own files, I have plenty of reports from around Fouke of a bizarre scream or yell accompanied by sightings of the creature. It seems that whatever the Boggy Creek Monster may be, it's not as shy about being heard as it is about being seen. While preparing to film Doyle's interview, we heard what might very well have been the creature's call for ourselves.
Was that a tree knot? That was a tree knot.
Well, this is about the time you start to hear them.
Doyle.
Did you hear it?
What was that? What was that?
It's probably one of them.
I caught that. I'm recording. Can you,
Yeah, this is the time you start to hear them.
Can you take a step? Let's see.
Yeah.
What was that? Listen.
Getting close.
Though we can't say for sure, it's entirely possible that Doyle and I had a brush with the same creature who has stalked this land for decades.
I believe this creature to be a primate of some sort. So I've been in a lot of places. I've probably been in 35 different countries, and I've heard a lot of different animals out in the woods. This particular animal I hadn't heard very much. And the only thing I can associate with the sound that I've heard out in the woods is a howler monkey. And they're not indigenous to South Arkansas. They're just not here. But it's the closest thing I can come up with.
And it was it was a holler modeled with a scream. I can't imitate that sound, but it was horrifying. You know, I've heard bears make sounds. I've heard bobcats. I've heard panthers make sounds. And they can make your hair stand on end, but this was horrifying in sound. And like I said, nothing that even comes close to comparing, you know, what that sound was.
If the monster is truly real, then the creature has to have a sustainable population. There can't be just one Boggy Creek Monster. While reports of the creature do share a general description, there are variations in hair color, size, facial features, and even attitude. It's not something you hear of as often as sightings of large, presumably adult creatures, but reports of juveniles do come in. The idea had apparently come to Charles Pierce himself as the inevitable sequel to The Legend of Boggy Creek, titled Boggy Creek 2: The Legend Continues, featured not only the classic marauding monster, but its offspring as well. Like all good stories, Boggy Creek 2's baby monster seems to have been rooted in reality.
The picture that I saw, again, is, 7 to 8 foot tall easily, and I can't explain to you why I have the feeling that it was juvenile, other than I work with animals and I see animals all the time, and it did not have an adult appearance. It was markedly juvenilistic in characteristic, but it was not an adult. Whatever. It wasn't full grown, in my opinion.
So let's talk about your latest experience. We discussed that a little bit. You said you were coming down, you're looking for firewood, is that right? Can you take me through What happened that day?
Well, it was about this time at night, or the afternoon, and I pulled my old Jeep down here in the woods and got my chainsaw and started cutting up some firewood. I got off in there and my wife stayed in the truck watching. I heard a cry that sounded kind of like a child. And so I started making my way through the brush to see what it was, to see if there was a lost kid out here. And as I made my way closer to the source of the cry, it was getting louder and louder till it almost turned into a scream. And then when I got to it through the bushes and could actually see it, I was amazed that it was a juvenile Bigfoot, probably about 5 foot tall, maybe a little shorter than 5 foot, and covered in hair, surprisingly human in the face. And at that point you could hear, I guess, Mom and Dad coming, and they were getting angry because they could hear their baby boy crying. They knew he was in distress.
So the sound you heard coming, I mean, how describe
it
that?
It sounded like it was 400 or 500 yards away at first, but they started getting louder and louder, and it was getting closer. I got back on shore and I looked at the truck, and nobody's in it. I'm like, oh, where's my wife at? And so I run to the truck and saw her. She was hiding in the floorboard of the truck. She had heard the sound of the big ones coming, and it scared her, so she rolled the windows up and locked the doors and hid in the floorboard of the truck.
It's been over 4 decades since it first appeared in my life, and I still know very little about the creature. Like many of those who claim to have seen it, it's hard to believe. The mysteries that surround the case are as perplexing today as they were a century ago. If it is real, this so-called monster seems to be ape-like in appearance, covered in hair, and has a foot with 3 to 5 toes. It keeps to the isolated, uninhabited regions of Miller County, only occasionally venturing down waterways such as Boggy Creek, possibly in search of food or more suitable habitat. Most importantly, once seen, it leaves an impression that is never outrun or forgotten.
And after I saw that, I kept trying to come in touch with the fact that you're not crazy. You saw what you saw, you know, and I took a lot of ridicule, but my story has never, I've told the story to my wife we've been married 34 years, it's never changed, and it's never gonna change because it's like a little video loop running through my head. I can see the same thing over and over and over again.
I saw something. I don't know what it was. I was a skeptic of Bigfoot until I saw what I saw.
Ever since I've seen it, it's become, you know, like I guess kind of like a undercover secret passion, because it's the mystery, and someday, somehow, somebody's gonna find the evidence that we all need to prove our saneness.
Once you kind of get over the fear of the sighting, that was very short-lived to me. What became a much bigger fear to me was people. The reaction, how people would receive the story, what they would think. Which is why this is the first time ever that I have talked about this event, especially the first time I've ever brought anybody through the whole experience on site. Though I've told the story to some, I've never before today came down to the site and walked anyone through it before. And a lot of it had to do with the fear of people way more than the fear of the creature.
Yeah, and I think then it becomes from something you see in a movie on the screen, later in your life it translates to a reality. You're in the legend, you're part of it.
Absolutely, the movies become real life to me. And over the years with what I've seen and living probably in the heart of Bigfoot country in the South, it's really come to life, and I'm living the movie now. Right.
Sightings of the Boggy Creek Monster haven't stopped. Today, the creature seems more alive than ever. While many may have expected the legacy of Pierce's movie to eventually fade away, it lives on as it's introduced to new generations of horror fans and to those with a curious eye for the unexplained. While development encroaches on some of the forested areas of Miller County, the bottomlands remain much the same as they've always been. It's here that the creature, or the memory of the creature, still resides.
You know, I've seen more things happening around here in the last 10 years than I've seen in the past. Even though there was a lot of sightings. You know, the sightings have never stopped. They've been going on for a long time.
Since the movie came out, a lot of things have changed. One thing, we've become more, burbia. It's a lot more advanced than it used to be. You know, before people would leave their house 3 o'clock in the morning, they didn't come home till the sun went down when they were done working. So they were in the woods gathering food out of the woods. So now people go to town, they work 8 hours, they come flop in front of a television. So the actual amount of people in the woods, in my mind, has decreased. Because unless you're a logger, or you're a farmer, or you're intentionally going out here for some reason, there's no reason just to show up.
The last call that we had to come in, there was a girl from up north was visiting the family here in Fouke. The 2 little girls were riding on the bicycle, and they was riding one in front of the other one, and the other little girl went on down and stopped, turned around, and her friend wasn't there. She had wrecked out. So she goes back and said, "What happened?" She says, "Well," it said, "right between us, a great big monster just come out of the weeds and run across in front of us. You didn't see it?" She said, "No, I just kept my eye on the road." Well, this little girl was scared to death. Now, these are little girls, and this little girl from up north, and this was right before I retired, which was in 2006.
Today, Fouke is still a quiet little town just off Highway 71, a stopgap on the way to somewhere else for some, and a big legend to others. The Legend of Boggy Creek has created an icon out of what was once just a local folk tale. Though there are still those who would rather forget the monster, for the most part, Fouke has adopted the creature as their local mascot. At the Miller County Museum, you can see the impact the famous legend has had on their local culture. Then there's the Monster Mart. What was once an ordinary convenience store has become something far more. Part museum, part souvenir stand, the Monster Mart has become Boggy Creek headquarters for monster hunters from all over the world. Clearly, Fouke sees a value in the legend.
It's part of our heritage here. I know some people, probably don't like it, and some people do. But you got that on anything you're talking about. But that was my main thrust, is trying to get something done here in my store, and to have something that would be more of a heritage type deal for a community. I mean, I want to expand more into more museum type items and artifacts and stuff that would be something to look at and something to ponder on and things like that,
Fouke was Fouke, just Fouke. But now whenever you talk about Fouke, you don't say Miller County, it don't ring a bell. But you say Boggy Creek, or you say Fouke, then all of a sudden there's someone in a crowd of more than 3 is going, here, know something about it. It's really has brought a lot here.
The monster sightings have brought the attention of the world on a little town and a little creek and the area of Miller County.
I often ask myself, what is it about this place that made the creature settle here? It's probably something simple. An animal in need of a primitive habitat with plenty of food and water and an abundance of cover. But maybe, like so many of the locations made famous by the movie, it just wants to be forgotten. The bean field where those famous 3-toed tracks were found is still there, but the Ford house, Herb Jones' old shack, and even the original general store have all disappeared. But if you know where to look, you might still catch a glimpse of their remains. Today, the Cerseis house, though featured heavily in the film, lies abandoned. Some of the family that called this place home have long since moved away. Many of the witnesses who've played a part in the creature story prefer to leave that piece of their lives behind. It's certainly understandable. The creature tends to haunt those it encounters long after they've parted ways. What is it that continues to bring me back year after year to this small town and its rugged wilderness? Why do I keep chasing a creature that some say is just a myth, a folktale, a legend? The truth is, I can't stop. Like so many of those who've experienced the Boggy Creek Monster, it haunts me. Not because I've seen it, but because I want to see it. So I come back to this place that first captured my imagination all those years ago when it flickered to life in the Legend of Boggy Creek. I come back because I want to hear the creature's mournful cry for myself. I come back because I want to know the truth.
Scene 1B, shot 1, take 3.
Hold on. Sorry. Ready? Whoa.
Okay, we're good.
All right.